Think back to the last time you walked into a room that intimidated you. Maybe it was a high-stakes meeting. Maybe it was a social setting where everyone seemed to hold more cards than you. Watch the playback of that memory in your head. Watch what your body did. You didn't wait to be told you were at the bottom of the hierarchy. You volunteered for it. You tightened your posture. You softened your voice. You scanned the faces around you, waiting for a cue on how to behave. Waiting for someone to grant you the right to take up space. You shrank before anyone even asked you to. And here is the quiet, unsettling truth that feels illegal to say out loud. Nobody forced you into that cage. You built it yourself and you locked the door from the inside. Most people move through life believing that their lack of power is some kind of biological reality or a streak of bad luck. They think the world is simply unfair to them, but power, in the absence of it, is an inheritance. The man in your head, the weak man who apologizes for his own existence, he was built by other people. Your limits were installed like malware by parents, teachers, and peers who were terrified of their own potential, and therefore terrified of yours. Every time you swallowed your words to keep the peace, someone taught you that. Every time you performed a nervous, accommodating smile for a boss who was disrespecting you, you were obeying a script written by people who needed you to stay manageable. And the worst part, you probably defended it. You called your shrinking humility. You called your hesitation being realistic. You convinced yourself you were just being a good person. But it was never realism, it was surrender. Understand the game beneath polite society. The world does not weigh your worth, it merely weighs your certainty. People do not have the time, the energy, or the capacity to look past your insecurities to find the hidden gold inside of you. They are lazy. They will accept whatever evaluation of yourself you hand them. If you walk in transmitting the signal of a subordinate, the world will happily treat you like a subordinate. If you treat yourself like an afterthought, the world will oblige. The first war you must win is not against the economy, or your employer, or the dating market. The first war is entirely internal. You must fire the weak manager who has been running your life. You must evict the version of you that negotiates his own defeat before the battle even begins. You must replace him with someone colder, someone sharper, someone who does not flinch. Because until you rewrite the code of the man inside your mind, nothing on the outside will change. The same patterns of disrespect will simply wear new faces. But escaping this cage requires understanding the single, cold mechanic that governs human respect. A mechanic most people die waiting for someone else to teach them. That invisible mechanic, the one that dictates who rises and who is forgotten, begins with the total elimination of the waiting game. There is a specific poison that keeps intelligent, capable men chained to mediocrity. They wait. They wait to be chosen. They wait to be noticed by their superiors. They wait for the algorithm or the dating app to validate their desirability. They wait for the world to hand them a permission slip to finally feel important. They stand at the edge of their own lives with their hands open, hoping someone with more leverage will drop a coin of approval into their palms. And while they wait, they call it patience. Ha! It is not patience. It is surrender dressed in respectable clothing. Think of the last time you desperately wanted a specific outcome. A promotion you felt you deserved. A salary negotiation where you needed the money. Or perhaps a modern dating scenario where you finally met someone who checked all your boxes. You wanted it. You wanted it so badly it consumed your thoughts. And because you are an open book, you let them see it. You leaned in just a little too far. You replied to the message just a fraction too quickly. You filled the awkward silence in the boardroom with nervous chatter, over-explaining your value, justifying your asking price before they even challenged it. You thought you were demonstrating passion. You thought you were showing them how committed you were. What you were actually broadcasting was a little scent of hunger. The perception of neediness is fatal. In the cold, primitive mathematics of human power dynamics, the person who needs the interaction the most is automatically the person who holds the least value. Every time you seek permission, every time you perform your desire for the audience, you announce that you are beneath the one you are asking. You hand them the gavel. You give them the authority to judge your worth. And human nature, being what it is, will always devalue what comes too easily and what begs to be taken. Money avoids the man who grips it too tightly. Respect vanishes the moment you ask for it. Even affection turns to disgust when it is chased, because desperation has a very specific frequency, and people flee from it on pure survival instinct. Remember the rule of this game. The world does not weigh your worth. It merely weighs your certainty. And nothing destroys the illusion of certainty faster than a man begging for an outcome. To reverse this, you must master the art of sovereign detachment. This does not mean you become numb. It does not mean you stop wanting wealth or status or connection. It means you sever the desperate, clutching need for any single specific outcome. You desire the prize, but you do not require it to survive. You walk into the negotiation room fully prepared to walk away. You engage with the object of your desire, holding the quiet, unshakable belief that your life will remain magnificent whether they choose to join you or not. You stop pleading. You start presenting terms. You act as though the door is already yours. And you are merely taking your time, deciding whether or not it is worth your energy to walk through it. When you truly internalize this, when you stop performing your hunger, a bizarre and beautiful paradox occurs. The moment you stop needing the world's permission, the world becomes desperate to give it to you. Opportunities cling to the man who could easily walk away. People are mesmerized by the man who does not require their applause. Yet, severing this neediness is entirely impossible as long as your face and your mouth continue to broadcast every fluctuation of your internal state to the predators around you. You cannot mask your neediness if your face remains an open book, broadcasting every internal storm to a room full of observers. Picture the last time someone threw a subtle insult your way. A passive-aggressive comment from a supposed friend, or a patronizing remark from a superior disguised as constructive feedback. Think about what you did in the seconds that followed. Your face flushed. Your posture shifted. You let out a nervous laugh to diffuse the tension. Or worse, you immediately scrambled to defend yourself. You over-explained your position. You desperately tried to prove them wrong. Here is the cold truth you have been avoiding. You tell yourself that people disrespect you because you are just unlucky in who you meet. You tell yourself that you are simply a victim of toxic people who take advantage of your good nature. No, they disrespect you because you handed them the exact instruction manual on how to break you. Every time you react emotionally to a provocation, you're giving away the map to your own ruin. You are showing them precisely which buttons generate fear, which levers trigger anger, and which words make you desperate for their validation. You reward their disrespect by proving to them that it works. The modern world has sold you a very convenient lie. You have been told that total transparency is a virtue, that wearing your heart on your sleeve is the highest form of authenticity. But in the cold mechanics of power, transparency in a world of opportunists is not honesty, it is nakedness. Machiavelli understood that the man who reveals his true feelings becomes a puppet to anyone willing to pull his strings. The average man is utterly readable. When he is angry, the whole room feels his lack of control. When he's anxious, his eyes betray him before his mouth ever opens. And readability, in the primitive part of the human brain, signals prey. The world does not weigh your worth. It merely weighs your certainty. And a man who cannot control his own reactions possesses no certainty at all. You must build the fortress of the unreadable. When the insult comes, you do not flinch. You do not scramble for a witty comeback to prove you are clever. You simply hold their gaze. You let a heavy, suffocating silence fall between you. You observe them as if they are a fascinating, slightly pathetic specimen under a microscope. A slight, detached smile. A steady, deadpan stare. Silence unsettles people far more than shouting ever could. It forces the provocateur to sit in the awkwardness of their own words. It makes them second-guess their own status. It makes them wonder if they went too far, or if you hold cards they cannot see. By doing this, you quietly remove every lever they have against you. They cannot bait you into rage. They cannot shame you into submission. You become a locked room they cannot enter. And human nature dictates that people will obsess over what they cannot decode. They respect what they cannot predict. Unpredictability signals strength. It forces the world to tread carefully around you. But simply going quiet is just playing defense. To truly dictate reality, you must learn how to weaponize the invisible architecture of every room you enter. To simply guard your reactions is to play a permanent game of defense. But if you want to dictate reality, you must learn to weaponize the invisible architecture of human interaction. Every conversation, every meeting, every date you have ever been on is a quiet contest. It is not a contest over facts or logic. It is a contest over whose version of reality is going to win. This silent battlefield is called the frame. The frame is the unspoken consensus of what is happening in any given moment. It dictates who is the prize, who is doing whom a favor, whose time is more valuable, and whose approval actually matters. Picture a scenario where someone is trying to force you into a quick decision. Maybe it is an aggressive boss demanding you take on extra work, or someone manufacturing urgency in a negotiation. They speak fast. They create artificial pressure. They sigh heavily or look at their watch, acting as though your hesitation is an inconvenience. The weak man gets sucked in immediately. He speeds up his own speech to match theirs. He feels the artificial pressure and rushes his choice. He apologizes for holding things up. In doing so, he steps blindly inside the other person's frame. He accepts the premise that their timeline is more important than his own clarity. And because of that, he loses the negotiation before a single term is even discussed. Here, the powerful man sees this game for exactly what it is. He recognizes urgency as a tactical trap designed to bypass his critical thinking. So, when they try to rush him, he slows down. He lets his words drag. He takes a long breath. He allows a heavy silence to hang in the air before he answers. He does not argue with their pacing. He simply refuses to participate in it. By holding his own rhythm, he forcefully collapses their frame and replaces it with his own. This applies to every social test you will ever face. When someone tries to guilt trip you for setting a boundary, they are attempting to impose a frame where you are the villain and they are the victim. If you apologize, if you over-explain your reasons, if you desperately try to prove you are a good person, you legitimize their frame. You agree that you are on trial and you hand them the role of the judge. Instead, you must remain mildly amused. You treat their emotional outburst as a small, unpredictable weather event happening far below you. You do not fight their reality. You simply remain entirely unaffected by it. Remember the law of this game. The world does not weigh your worth. It merely weighs your certainty. And the man who holds his frame with absolute, unbreakable certainty becomes the center of gravity in any room he enters. People are secretly desperate to be led. They are exhausted by the burden of defining their own reality, and they are always looking for someone who seems entirely convinced of their own authority. When you project an unshakable frame, when you are never rushed, never rattled, and never defensive, the minds of everyone around you will naturally drift toward your reality. The way iron drifts toward a magnet. They will begin to seek your approval while pretending not to. They will measure their reactions against yours. You become the architect of the dynamic. But controlling the room is a fundamentally worthless skill if you continue to invite the wrong people into your palace. Controlling the room, holding your frame, and weaponizing silence. All of these are fundamentally worthless skills if you continue to invite the wrong people into your palace. Think of the childhood friend you have slowly outgrown. Or consider the comfortable peer group you see every weekend. The group whose entire bond is built on shared misery, cynical complaints, and mocking anyone who actually tries to rise above the baseline. Think of what happens when you introduce a new ambition to them, when you mention a new discipline you are adopting, or a standard you are raising. Watch their faces. They will offer supportive words, but words are cheap. Watch the micro-expressions. Watch the brief, uncontrollable flicker of resentment in their eyes before they remember to smile. Listen to the subtle, condescending tone when they tell you to be careful, or to stay realistic, or when they joke that you are changing too much. Understand the psychology of this moment without any sentimentality. They do not want you to succeed. Your growth is a harsh, unforgiving mirror that reflects their own stagnation. And rather than put in the agonizing work to change their own lives, human nature dictates that it is much easier to pull you back down into the dirt where they feel safe. And yet, you stay. You drag these anchors behind you. You justify it because you have history. You mistake loyalty to a stagnant past for nobility. You convince yourself that if you just lead by example, you can lift them up with you. You cannot. You cannot save a man who is in love with his own chains. The world does not weigh your worth. It merely weighs your certainty. And when you tolerate weak, cynical, or complacent people in your inner circle, your certainty bleeds out through 1,000 invisible cuts. You slowly lower your own standards just to keep the peace. You do not remain untouched by the company you keep. You become the absolute, mathematical average of the expectations you allow near you. This means you must conduct a ruthless, uncompromising audit of your time and your circle. Not every person who has been a part of your history deserves a ticket to your future. You must evaluate them coldly, not by the long memories you share, but by the actual energy they bring to your present. Do they sharpen you, or do they drain you? Do they demand more of you, or do they comfort you into staying small? When you identify the parasites disguised as peers, you do not need to announce your departure. The powerful man does not write dramatic letters or start bitter arguments. He simply reallocates his most valuable asset, his time. He goes quiet. He fades from the rooms where his ambition is treated as an insult, and he deliberately places himself in rooms where his ambition is the bare minimum requirement to enter. It is a heavy, sobering realization. Elevating your life requires mourning the loss of people you once loved. It requires the stomach to walk away from comfortable mediocrity and stand in the cold air alone. It requires you to look a friend in the eye and silently decide that you will no longer drown with them. Leaving them behind is terrifying. Which brings us to the final, uncompromising barrier between the man you are and the man you must become. That barrier is your own fear and the quiet, pathetic delusion that someone else is going to save you from it. Think of the final threshold, the moment your finger hovers over the send button, demanding the price you know you are worth. The second before you step into a room full of people who hold more status than you. The hesitation before you launch the project that strips away your safe anonymity and exposes you to public judgment. In that exact fraction of a second, you pause. You wait for the sudden arrival of confidence. You wait to feel ready. You look around, unconsciously hoping that some authority figure will tap you on the shoulder, hand you a certificate of competence, and tell you that you are finally allowed to take up space. Listen to me carefully. No one is coming to crown you. There is no invisible committee reviewing your quiet sacrifices. There is no moral scoreboard that eventually rewards you for being a harmless, accommodating person. The world is entirely too consumed with its own desperate survival to hunt for the hidden value you refuse to put on display. If you keep waiting for permission to act, you will simply watch bolder, less intelligent men build empires out of the exact opportunities you were too polite to seize. The ordinary man stays frozen at this threshold because he believes a lie. He believes that powerful people do not feel fear. Fear is a permanent resident. It is wired into the deepest, oldest parts of your nervous system across 100,000 years of evolution. You cannot evict it. No amount of self-help, no amount of positive thinking will ever make it disappear entirely. The difference between the ruler and the ruled is not the absence of fear. It is the chain of command. The weak man takes orders from his fear. He treats his anxiety as wisdom. He treats his hesitation as a stop sign, and he spends his entire life retreating into a smaller and smaller cage. The powerful man treats his fear as a passenger. He acknowledges it is in the car, but he absolutely refuses to let it touch the steering wheel. He moves while his hands are still shaking. He speaks while his voice is still threatening to crack. He acts with cold precision, entirely without the comfort of a guaranteed outcome, because he understands the final, unchanging law of human nature. The world does not weigh your worth. It merely weighs your certainty. You must decide that you are the prize before anyone else agrees with you. You must claim the title internally, in the dark, when you have absolutely no external proof to back it up. This is the sovereign act, the self-coronation. You must become deeply, unapologetically unreasonable in your self-belief. The weak man waits for the world to treat him with respect so that he can finally feel respectable. The strategist reverses the equation. He decides he is respectable, and he holds that frame with such quiet, immovable stillness that reality eventually surrenders and treats him accordingly. When you walk into a room wearing a crown you forge yourself, the environment has no choice but to adjust to the heavy gravity of your presence. People will not consciously know why they are deferring to you. They will simply feel that defying your reality would be a mistake. But this shift does not happen by accident, and it does not happen someday. It happens the exact moment you drop the exhausting act of being a subordinate. Tomorrow morning, when your feet hit the floor, let the weak man who waited for permission stay dead in the bed. Walk into your workplace, your home, or the streets with the cold detachment of a man who already owns the territory. Stop explaining yourself. Stop performing your hunger. Stop handing the gavel to smaller men. Let the silence do the heavy lifting and watch the world quietly adjust to its new master.